So quiz tomorrow is on 4.4 and 4.5, and it is 10 questions. So I'm going to do a little bit of everything from the review, and then whatever we don't do, you guys have to do for homework. So let's take a look at, let's do number 3. What would we do first for number 3? Awesome. We're going to take out the GCF, which is 3n to the 4th power. When we take out 3n to the 4th power, we're left with n squared minus 11n plus 72 divided by 3. 24. Andrew. All right, let's factor it. What are 2 factors of 24 that add to negative 11? If we did negative 12 and negative 2, that would add to negative 14, so it wouldn't work. Negative 3 and negative 8. Perfect, that works. So we have n minus 3 and n minus 8 with our 3n to the 4th power on the outside. Can we factor this anymore? Nope, so that would be our answer. Make sure you read the instructions on the quiz. Some of the questions are going to say factoring. Some of them are going to say solve. So the ones that say solve will have like equals 0, and you solve it all the way. So your answer is going to have an equals. If your question doesn't have an equal sign in the beginning, you're not solving it, you're just factoring it. So I just want the factors. Okay, if you said n equals 3, technically that's true here, but that's not what this question's asking for. There's no equal sign, so don't put an equal sign in it. Let's do number 5. I'm gonna rewrite it on the side here so we have more room. 2w to the 4th power minus 7w to the 3rd power minus 15w squared. So this one is number 5. What should we do first? Take out the GCF, which is w squared. So then we're left with 2w squared minus 7w minus 15. What would we do next? Add the first and the last term? We don't add them. Multiply. So here, since our leading coefficient is not 1, we have to start by multiplying the first times the last. 2 times negative 15 is negative 30. What are 2 factors of negative 30 that add to negative 7? Negative 10 and positive 3. Perfect. So this would factor into w minus 10 and w plus 3. What do I have to remember to do if I start by multiplying? Divide both of them by that number out front. So we're going to divide both of these numbers by 2. Simplify if you can. So this would be w squared on the outside. Can I divide 10 by 2? So what would go into our parentheses? W minus 5. Can I divide 3 by 2? No. So what would I do with the 2? Put it in front of the w. So this parentheses would be what? 2w plus 3. So this would be our answer. All right, let's take a look at, we'll do number 9. So I have w cubed minus 125. How would I factor this? It's our cube, our difference of cubes here. So we use our cube formula. Our cube formula goes AB, A squared, AB, B squared. Now, how do I know what signs I'm going to put in it? SOAP. What does SOAP stand for? Same, opposite, always positive. So same would be the same that we started with. Opposite would become plus, and then the last one is always positive. So our signs go minus, plus, plus. Now let's figure out what's going to go in the a and b spot. So if a to the third power is w to the third power, what is just a? W. If b to the third power is 125, what is just b? Perfect. 5, because 5 cubed would give us 125. So let's write our factors now. What would go into the first parentheses? W minus 5. What would come next? W squared plus 5W plus 25. 5 squared, which would be 25. Awesome. And this is as factored as we can go. Just as a helpful reminder, some common cubes that we might see. What is 1 cubed? 1, 2 cubed, 8, 3 cubed, 27, 4 cubed, 64, 5 cubed, we just did, was 125, 6 cubed, 216, 7 cubed, 343, and then 10 cubed is 1,000. So these are some common cubes that you might see. So it's helpful to know these. That way when you see, if you had like a W cubed minus 1,000, you know what your A and your B are going to be. Any questions here? So looking at 13. How do I factor something when I have 4 terms? Grouping. Group the first 2, group the second 2. What's the GCF from our first group? X squared. When we take out an x squared, what are we left with? X minus 6. What's the GCF from the second group? Why negative 9 and not positive 9? Perfect. Our parentheses have to be exactly the same, so we need the signs to switch, so we're going to take out a negative 9. So what are we left with when we take out a negative 9? X minus 6, because remember, when we divide this by negative 9, it turns into negative 6. So now let's put the outsides together. What would go into our first set of parentheses? X squared minus 9. And then the insides go together as x minus 6. Can this be factored anymore?
Yes.
Which part? The first part. What's special about it? Difference of squares. So what would it factor into? X plus 3 and x minus 3. The order doesn't matter. If you wanted to do minus first, that's fine. And then x minus 6. So this would be our answer. What's special about 14? Also difference of squares. So how would we factor the difference of squares? So one of our parentheses is going to get a plus, the other one's going to get a minus. Let's see what goes into which spot. What times what gives us 36? 6 and 6. What times what gives us p to the 4th power? P squared and p squared. So we have 6p squared and 6p squared in our first spots. What times what gives us 25? 5 and 5. Can I factor these anymore? No. Sometimes you want to check the minus to see if that one's a difference of squares, because it's only going to be the minus one, plus won't be difference of squares because it's not the difference. So you just have to check and see if the numbers are perfect squares, because it might be able to be factored more. But 6 isn't a perfect square and 5 is not a perfect square, so can't factor it anymore. All right, we'll do 20. Yes?
For number 16, since it's 4, how would you do that?
Same way we just did the other one. What would go into our first spot? Y squared and y squared. What would go into the second spot? 4 and 4. Can either one of these be factored anymore?
Yeah.
Which one? Why just the one with the minus? Because it's the difference of squares. What does difference mean? Subtract, minus. If you have y squared plus 4, that's not the difference of squares. So this one would factor into y plus 2 and y minus 2. So our answer would be y squared plus 4 times y plus 2 times y minus 2. So now let's look at 20. So 20, we're determining if the binomial is a factor of the polynomial. So we have to do synthetic division. So with synthetic division, what's going to go inside the box? -12, -69, 39, and 30. Always check to make sure you're not missing any terms. If you are, you need to put a 0 in that spot. So if this was x to the 4th power and we were missing an x cubed, make sure you put a 0 in that spot. So you need all the terms after the one that you start with. What's going to go on the outside? -6 or +6? +6. We changed the sign. So +6 on the outside. So let's drop down 12. 12 times 6 is 72. Yep. 72 minus 69. 3. 6 times 3. 18. 18 plus 39. 57. 6 times 57. Let's write it out. 57 times 6. 6 times 7. What is it? 42. 6 times 5. 30 plus 4. So 343. 342 plus 30 would be 372. How can we determine if it's a factor or not? What do we need to know? What has to be 0? The remainder has to be 0. Is the remainder 0? So what would this be? Not a factor. Yep, not a factor. If it is 0, then it would be a factor. So you would say, yes, a factor. So kind of just yes or no here. Remember, this needs to be 0. Let's do 15. So 15, we just want to find two factors of 28 that add to 11. What would they be? That add to 11. 4 and 7, perfect. So in our parentheses, we're going to have a +4 and a +7. What's going to go to that first spot, though? N squared, because we start with n to the 4th power. So when we break this apart, it'd be n squared and n squared. So n squared plus 4 and n squared plus 7. Can I factor either one of these anymore? No. Neither one is the difference of squares, so can't be factored. So this would be our answer. So if you start with n to the 4th power, you're going to break it into n squared and n squared. So you're factoring the same, but instead of it being like n plus 4 and n plus 7, it would just be n squared and n squared. So 4.5, we are solving the equation. So we're going to have to factor, but we want to solve it all the way. Let's take a look at, let's do number 3. What would we do first for number 3? Add the 3y squared to move it to the other side. It has to be equal to 0 before we factor. So we have 3y to the 4th power minus 6y cubed plus 3y squared equals 0 now. Yeah. What would we do next? So I'm going to take out the GCF, which is 3y squared. So when we take out 3y squared, we're left with y squared minus 2y plus y. No, plus 1, sorry. 3y squared divided by 3y squared would be 1. equals 0. Everybody good so far? All right, what would we do next? What are two factors of 1 that add to -2? -1 and -1, perfect. So y minus 1 and y minus 1. And then don't forget we have 3y squared outside. Now we factored it, but here we need to solve. It says equal to 0, so we need an equal sign in our answer. It has to be y equals. What would we do next? Equal each one to 0. So don't forget the GCF needs to be set equal to 0. Y minus 1 is equal to 0, and y minus 1 equals 0. So 3y squared equals 0, y minus 1 equals 0, and y minus 1 equals 0. So let's solve the first one. 3y squared equals 0. What would we do? Divide by 3. What's 0 divided by 3? 0. So y squared equals 0. How do we get rid of the squared? Square root. So what does y equal? 0. In the next one, we're going to add 1 to both sides. So y is equal to 1. And then the other one, we add 1 to both sides. So y is equal to 1. So when you're listing your answers, you don't have to list it twice if it repeats. So here we just have 0 and 1. You could list it twice if you want. That's totally fine. So in 7 through 10, we're just going to find the zeros. Don't worry about graphing yet. We will do that on the test. We'll practice more before then. So for the quiz, we just need to find the zeros. So for 10, we're going to just change f of x to be 0. And let's solve. So if 0 is equal to negative 3x cubed minus 15x squared minus 12x. All right, what should we do first?
Take out -3x.
Why would we take out a negative 3x?
So you don't have to have a -x.
Awesome. We like it when our x squared term, our leading term, is positive. So we want to take out a -3. So we're left with x squared plus 5x plus 4. Now let's factor. What are two factors of 4 that add to 5? 4 and 1. So this would break down into x plus 4 and x plus 1 and a negative 3x out front. What do we do next?
You set all of them equal to 0.
Set each one equal to 0. Don't forget about the GCF that we took out in the beginning. So negative 3x is equal to 0. X plus 4 is equal to 0. And x plus 1 is equal to 0. So what does x equal?
X equals 0, -4, and -1.
Awesome. X equals 0, -4, and -1. Perfect. So here we just divided by -3, and 0 divided by -3 is still 0. So these would be our 3 answers. All right. I'm gonna do 14, and that'll kind of help you with 11 and 12. So let's look at 14, and then I'll talk about 11 and 12 too. So there's two 14s on the page. We're gonna do the one on the right. So here we want to find all the real solutions to the equation. So if we have 4 terms, you could try to factor by grouping, but if grouping doesn't work, what do we do? Synthetic division. We're going to do last over first. So factors of the last term over factors of our first. So what are factors of 6? 2, 3, 1, and 6. So it's always the positive and negatives of these numbers. And then factors of our first would just be plus or minus 1. So it just makes them all whole numbers. So we're going to do synthetic division. What's going to go in the box?
1, 2, 5, 6, and negative 6.
1, 2, -5, -6. Always check to make sure you're not missing any terms. We are good here. Don't need any zeros, and so we are good. What do you want to try first?
1.
Sure, let's try 1. You can pick any one of these numbers to try first. If you tried a number that was not on the list, it's not going to work. So stick to the numbers on the list. So drop down the 1. We get 1. This would be 3. 3. -2. -2. Does 1 work? Nope. So let's pick something different. Remember, this is just trial and error. Some things are going to work, some will not. Let's try 2. We got 2, 4, 8, 3, 6. -6 plus 6? 0. Does 2 work? Yes. So x is equal to 2. So that is one of our answers. What would I do next? What do we do? Anybody remember? Factor. Since we started with x to the 3rd power, our answer here is now going to be x squared plus 4x plus 3. So we have x squared plus 4x plus 3. What are 2 factors of 3 that add to 4? 3 and 1. So this would be x plus 3 and x plus 1. We're trying to find the solutions. We're finding the zeros, so we have to solve it all the way. What would we do next? Set them equal to 0. So what does x equal? -3 and -1. So we'll put that on our list. X is equal to 2, -3, and -1. Okay. Yeah, so if you have x to the 3rd power, that means you're going to have 3 answers. So you only have to do this once that actually works. So you do it as many times until you find a number that works. Then you just take your answer and factor it from there. Because if you start with x to the 3rd power, this will be x squared, and you can factor. If this was x to the 4th power, you'd have to do it twice until you get to x squared, and then factor it from there. So let's say, I can't just make up numbers for one, but let's say we had x to the 4th power. We would have to do synthetic division, find a number that works, then we take this answer and we do it again. Yeah, you do the synthetic division twice, because this would still be x to the 3rd power. So you'd have to do it again until it works, then you get x squared, then you can factor it. You could, because like an answer could repeat, but like sometimes it might not work. So you just try again until you get a number that works. Same thing that way. So it's just the same thing, but you would just have to do it twice. I think there was some in the homework where it was x to the 4th power that you had to do twice. Yes. 13, you could use synthetic division, or how else could we solve this one here? We could just factor. This one factors, so what are 2 factors of -9 that add to -8? -9 and 1. So what would go into our parentheses? X squared minus 9 and x squared plus 1. Can I factor one of these anymore, or both of them anymore? The first one, because it's the difference of squares. So what would it factor into? X plus 3 and x minus 3. And then we still have the x squared plus 1. So here we're solving. It asks us for find all the real solutions. We need to find what it's equal to. So we set each one equal to 0. X plus 3 equals 0. X minus 3 equals 0. And x squared plus 1 equals 0. So what will x equal? -3, +3, and let's work out the last one. We're going to subtract 1 on both sides, so x squared is equal to -1. What would we do next? Square root. What's the square root of -1? I, just I, or 1I, but it would be I. But what do we have to remember when we take the square root of both sides? Plus or minus. We're going to get into more like imaginary solutions in the next section. So for now, don't worry that you get an I. This question asks for the real solutions, so the ones without an I. So that would just be -3 and +3. Sure, but I don't think any work out to be an I on the quiz. So 11 and 12 is just looking for all the possible solutions, so you don't actually have to find the solutions. If we are looking for our possible solutions for number 11, we do the last over first. So we have plus or minus. What are factors of our last? You don't have to list it twice because you're just listing the possible options. 2, 4, and 1. What are factors of the first? 3 and 1. So when we did this in the notes, I told you you're not going to have any fractions that you'll have to do the synthetic division with, but here we're just listing the possible options. So I left this one as fractions here. But we have 2 over 3, the positive and negatives of all of these numbers. So 2 over 3, 4 over 3, 1 over 3, and then 2 over 1, which would just be 2, 4 over 1, which is 4, and 1 over 1, which is 1. So these are all of our possible options, the positive and negatives of all of these. So just find which one on the list is not a possible option. Yeah, which is not a possible solution. Which one? -3. -3 is not on our possible solutions here. So, yes.